It's already Star Wars time again, so we'll be going into that as well as a few others from the past couple of weeks or before. So obviously we're going to start with Solo, a Star Wars story, much like Rogue One. And obviously before anything else, there's the stuff you've pretty much already heard about where a lot of people were thinking this might be a disaster because of the directorial change, despite the fact there was the Gareth Edwards, Tony Gilroy thing going on with Rogue One, and to my understanding, most people like Rogue One pretty well. And then there is this where we had Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did the 21 Jump Street movies and the Lego movie, trying to kind of bring their unique thing to this before ultimately it fell through creatively, and they brought in Ron Howard, of all people. And yeah, so I never really, with the whole Rogue One thing, that never got me too bent out of shape. I figured it would work itself out in the long run. Then there's also the idea that, I guess there was some people who tried to make a big fuss out of Alden Ehrenreich getting an acting coach on the set, despite the fact that it wasn't anything to do with the quality of what he was doing. He himself hired him just to kind of try to make sure he got, I don't know if it was the Harrison Ford thing down or what it was, but yeah, it's not that uncommon of a thing. So I really wasn't all that worried. And then over the past week or so, I kind of started getting a little more hyped, despite the fact that I do mostly agree that it's not exactly a movie that needed to be put into this franchise. But I figured we'll just see what they do. Might as well go in open-minded, why not? So, what we have here is when we start, it is nice that, I wasn't, it is a little inconsistent, his performance, but, I did find myself kind of pulled in pretty fast, where, especially with kind of the voice that he's doing, to where it doesn't really, it's certain, you can hear Harrison Ford in there, but it doesn't necessarily feel like an imitation, which I think is pretty much exactly where he should have been. Like I said, it is a little inconsistent, I think, but for the most part, I thought that worked, and he does have the look and demeanor. I've heard some people say that he seems a bit too almost puny to be Han Solo, and maybe a little too. I don't know if it was maybe the portrayal is too light, but the thing is, badass as he's often built up to be, there was kind of always something bumbling about Han Solo to an extent, and something comedic. So I really thought all of this was fine. Like I said, if not exactly perfect by any means, but I thought he did his job relatively well. And he's an actor where ever since Beautiful Creatures, I've been a bit of a cheerleader for this guy anyway. So yeah, I thought that worked fine. And it did this opening. Well, I was on board quickly. Aesthetically, I wasn't sure because everything seemed kind of dark, which ultimately in this particular scene does serve a purpose, given that the creatures basically live off of the dark because the sunlight, apparently hurts them. But there was also like the battlefield stuff where everything seemed like really foggy and all that, and it's like every now and then it was kind of like it was harder to see than it probably should have been. But even so, in the opening, we still get this really nice chase scene that's really well done, really exciting, has minimal cutting, and all of that works fine. And then there's also these directorial touches that Howard seems to have done, where like, yeah, Clint Howard is in there, which is always great. He does show up in person. I could have sworn I heard his voice behind a helmet on the battlefield as well. And speaking of the battlefield, there is that shot of Woody Harrelson walking to where it's like, I'm almost certain Ron Howard had Paths of Glory in mind when he did this shot. Obviously, it's not to that scope, but just one of those little things to where it feels like he's kind of going for that kind of older feel to a movie like Paths of Glory, but this one particular shot. However, it does have some of the stuff you're probably expecting when you have this movie that's setting up a character that we already know so well and so many different things about. So they're gonna do prequel things. They're gonna give things origins that don't really need origins. Like, for instance, his name. That felt kind of, once again, just really unnecessary, if anything else. Just his name being Han Solo We totally would have been fine if that was just his name. It didn't really need any backup. And then there was one that also felt particularly forced was once he's kind of introducing himself formally to Chewie, Chewie introduces himself as Chewbacca, and he says, well, you need a nickname, because I'm not going to say that whole thing every time. It's like, that's only one extra syllable, dude. It's like, you could have just had him say his name, and then if he just called him Chewie without, provocation through the rest of the movie, nobody would have questioned it. You give your friends nicknames, it's what you do. So there is that, and there's some things where they kind of make something that's, powerful in the original trilogy and so on. They give it a bit of a silly kind of factor to it, like when the Empire has like these recruitment ads going on, and they play like almost a Muzak version of the Imperial March during them. And it's like there's something a little silly about that, but then again, this is Star Wars, so we shouldn't get too bent out of shape about something getting a little too silly. Look at some of the characters in any portion of this franchise. It happens. So as far as the action goes, I don't. This is kind of where I really fall in between, because the action looks really nice, and it's certainly big, and it's treated with this kind of as this huge grand spectacle and everything, which Howard does a really great job with. The trouble with it though is, and I kind of noticed this first with the first heist like scene where they're on the train like thing, and it's kind of like there's a little too much going on, I think, for it to be totally engaging. But it does succeed in feeling, big and grand, which there is certainly something to commend about that. It might seem like it was taking the easy way out by saying, let's just go big but not have any particular substance to this scene. But that is an important factor regardless. But it does feel very much... The Kessel Run scene, unfortunately, really, too, is kind of like, you feel like it's really big, and effects-wise, it looks great, but it's almost so big, and so much is going on, that there's definitely a hollowness to it, to where you're just not quite as into it as you definitely should be. But there is that. But talking about the other kind of, big spectacle thing, another thing that Howard does here that I really like is, you can call out some of the more silly things in regards to it being a prequel and acting like one with stuff that doesn't need that, but there's still definitely a respect you can see from his vision when you see things like the first time Chewie's in the cockpit of the Falcon with him, or the first time we see the Falcon, are all treated like these huge, big moments. It's like if you watch the movies in chronological order, this would be the first time we see the Falcon, or the first time Chewie and Han flying it together. And they're treated as such, so I thought that was really nice and really showed this respect that they had for the original stuff. So that I did appreciate that. And obviously, one of the big factors that really had me hyped for this movie is, I'm sure, the same thing that had so many other people hyped, and that, of course, was Donald Glover playing Lando. And especially with, like, the This Is America video coming out very recently, it's like, now I'm trying to get caught up in Atlanta and stuff like that, and it's like I'm just in full-on take in everything Donald Glover does mode. And this definitely had me hyped, his presence. And, of course, there's a lot of great things he does here. He is able to channel. I heard an interview where he said that basically the only thing Billy D. Williams told him was just act charming. Nothing else really matters that much. Don't overthink it. And that's pretty much it. You can tell he really took that advice, and that's exactly what he does. So he just makes it this effortless thing as he goes into it. And you can there are a couple of things in there, like his laugh at one point sounds exactly like Billy D. Williams, and it's amazing. And there's also one thing, I feel like they brought it down a little bit, but this is actually something me and my brother talked about, if they were going to do this or not. The fact that he calls him Han instead of Han, which we saw in Empire and Return of the Jedi. And I like that he did that, and I feel like they cheapened it a little bit by having Han correct him. And it's like, it probably would have been, I mean, yeah, it's the first time he did it, maybe that's, okay, but still would have been one of those things that would have just been nice if that's just something that he did and that's it. But that's what we do with Star Wars. We just talk about these tiny little insignificant things, like whether he calls him Han or Han, and we just go into that for much longer than we need to, because that's the Star Wars way. But honestly, even though I do love what Donald Glover's doing, and it is some of his scenes are brought down a little bit because it feels like nothing to do with what he's doing, but it's like a lot of his scenes are basically entire scenes devoted to throwaway lines in Empire. So it kind of feels almost like we know the movie step by step once he enters, and maybe even a little before or after too. No, but as great as he is, I think personally my favorite performance in the movie is Paul Bettany, as basically our villain, where he's the interesting thing about these scenes, for starters, is when we first get on his ship in his place, it does have this it's like an upper class, it feels like an upper class version of Jabba's palace, and just kind of the way it runs and the entertainment and all that. And it's this really kind of nice precursor, his relationship with the Paul Bettany character. It's a really nice precursor to what we know, how the people like Jabba he would end up getting involved with, that this is kind of the start of that. There are some vague, not so vague references to Jabba and his relationship with him later, but this is kind of a really nice starting point to show this is how he got started really getting involved with like these really, high class criminals and stuff like that, and gangsters and all that. But yeah, there's just something really cool and sinister that Bettany brings to this character, and he really is a high point towards the climax too. Like, I had heard a lot of criticism towards the climax and all that. I don't mind the climax to an extent, because of that one particular factor about it that's just kind of like, some people thought it was anticlimactic, but I like the way it was almost like no bullshit about it, or at least that one particular moment. But back to the Bettany stuff, not just his appearance, where it's like, you would think just adding red lines to an actor's face would not really do a whole lot, but I do like his appearance is really menacing in a very kind of, subdued way. But that's also comes through in his performance also, and he does get a great moment. His introduction is that it very much brings back memories of Vader in The Empire Strikes Back, when they say, "Oh, you can't see him right now, he's in a meeting." And it immediately cuts to the dude he's having a meeting with, and he's killing him. And it's like, it reminds me so much of those scenes in Empire that just start with somebody dropping dead after talking to Vader or trying to reason with him, or just being the messenger. So I really liked what he was able to add to this story as well, and I like the addition of that character. So, and yeah, it does go in some directions where it's like, it seems like they want to do more with this, like the way it didn't matter, in regard, like, Rogue One, we knew how it was going to end, and it just flowed right into that, and it just really fit into the story like a perfectly sized puzzle piece. With this, it does kind of seem like, I heard that Alden Ehrenreich has, like, I guess he's contracted to do, like, 3 movies as Han Solo or something. And you can tell they kind of leave stuff open, like they want to keep going in certain directions with these in other standalone movies. I don't know what the plan is, but the ending, questions are unanswered, and there are some things. There's one thing in particular that's very confusing in regards to the timeline, but I don't know. I don't know. I could totally just have misinterpreted that scene, but I don't know. So, yeah, and the pacing is nice. It does feel long. It probably feels as long as it is, 2 hours and 15 minutes. But it does feel like something is, regardless of feeling long, it does feel like something is always happening. So they were able to accomplish that, but like I said, the action scenes, good as some of them are, and well put together as they are, mostly feel pretty hollow. And there's stuff. It feels like they're trying too much to kind of set up other things to kind of continue off this, when we're starting to get to that point to where we're afraid they're going to start. Some people think they're way past this already, but they're blowing this up a little too much and trying to have a little too many things going on in this universe, branching off of just the episodes. But in the meantime, unless they start getting really, really shitty, I'm just going to keep, embracing what they do and go in with an open mind and see what happens. I'm one of the people that really like The Last Jedi. I had similar complaints to a lot of people that hate The Last Jedi, but I thought a lot more of it worked than what didn't. So I'll take them as they come, and we'll just make it a step-by-step process. And yeah, like I said, some of the aesthetic was really lacking in regards to things being too dark and too foggy, for more time than it should have been, but yeah. There's also, more of those callbacks, like some of the costumes. There's a dude on the battlefield that seems to be wearing what looks like the Kylo Ren helmet. There's the moment when, Woody Harrelson's wearing the disguise that Lando would be wearing in Return of the Jedi and all that stuff. Han talked about in A New Hope the idea of Chewie ripping off arms out of sockets. If you want to see that, you'll be perfectly happy. So yeah, there are a lot of those callbacks, but I don't feel like some of them felt a little too much, but for the most part, I don't think they overdid it or anything. So as a whole, so yeah, this is okay. It's not as good as, say, probably Rogue One was, but for what it is, I think it's fine. I think but I say that as somebody that's just willing to embrace almost anything Star Wars, so take that for what you will from that particular point of view. So yeah, I think that's all I really need to say about this, so we'll go on to the next thing. The next movie is going to be Fahrenheit 451, an HBO retelling. You're going to have to bear with me if I get a couple of details here and there, maybe a bit inaccurate. I have somewhat of a recollection of the source material and somewhat of a recollection of the Truffaut movie. Not that those are much of the same thing, but yeah, and we have another one here that also seems to be taking quite a few liberties. But first off, it's to my understanding that I guess in regards to the advertisements, a lot of people were mistaking this for a miniseries, which kind of makes sense. I imagine they could probably open it up to something like that, especially if they follow the source material a bit more closely. But here they've managed to condense this into yet another hour and 40-minute movie, which I think isn't too far off from how long the Truffaut movie was. But the really intriguing thing about this time, is that we have Michael B. Jordan and Michael Shannon as the stars, and you almost just kind of immediately think, there's no way this could go wrong. At least not terribly, because these are two actors that, especially right now, have just such a commanding presence and are just really just one right after the other, just doing really good things and really taking off. Obviously Shannon has been forever, but and has been continuing to do so, and this is him reuniting with the director of 99 Homes. So yeah, this really could have been something really huge and really great. However, we do have what they seem to want to do most is the whole taking this idea and basically updating it, and putting some current social commentary in it, which obviously to an extent is certainly fitting, as long as you don't beat us over the head with it and don't make it too blatantly obvious. But because obviously they have some updating to do in regards to, there's a difference between what the future was when the book was written and when the Truffaut movie came out. So we've got to go beyond the 60s in order to get to our future. So we do have, I mean, yeah, it does get more of it has less of, I don't know if it's like the TV aesthetic or what, but it's like, I feel like they're going for a Blade Runner thing, but it's much less Blade Runner and much more like Duncan Jones's Mute, his Netflix movie with Alexander Skarsgård that came out earlier this year. And yeah, and they do have, some stuff that might resemble our current reality, like the voice command thing that is basically also acts as an all-seeing eye, that if they want to do something that they don't want seen or heard, they have to, like, not only tell it to go dark, but they have to, like, cover it with lights and shit. And then there's, like, this time they don't just have to, go into houses and burn books or whatever. They have to, like, people can download books now. There's little touches, like one of the books that's burning is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So like books that we wouldn't have seen burned in the other tellings. And it's another approach here that I don't really recall being from any of the other reincarnations of this story is that the firemen are basically like celebrities. Like their faces get put on buildings, and they have like online fans and online followings, and it's this kind of almost I wouldn't say, almost like cult like followings, I guess, from people that we hardly see, mostly behind social media or whatever, or this future's depiction of social media. And yeah, and then they include stuff like some slang that is more current to today, like the obvious pun that when Michael B. Jordan's trying to rev up his fans, he's talking about how fire he is. Yes, hope to God they're not still using today's slang that far into the future. But yeah, and not just in cases like that, but the dialogue just does kind of in general feel a bit weak when it's not being big, predictable monologues or whatever, or stuff we've already heard before. Even coming out of Michael B. Jordan or Michael Shannon's mouths, it's still just like, yeah, it feels very monologue-y, I guess. But there's also stuff, like, when it just feels really cheap, like, when Michael B. Jordan uses the line, he's the guy's running that's been downloading the books, and he shoves him against the wall and says, like, you hide from me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize, and it's like, it's a Reservoir Dogs line, which in turn was taken from Angels with Dirty Faces, and it's by the time it gets here, it just doesn't have that, and it just feels cheap. And they do add some other things though that are interesting, like apparently the addition of film in regards to what needs to go. Like he's got where he was usually hiding the books, he now has like an actual film reel of Singing in the Rain, apparently. I'm not sure where he got that, but, and he's got, like, an old VHS from Blockbuster of Taxi Driver, that he keeps hidden away. And little details like that, I was interested in, and it doesn't completely, like, fall apart entirely. There are moments here and there that do work, not just little details like that, but, like, the particular scene when when they're in the house with all the books, and he basically is looking at a Kafka book, then this is like the first time he's ever held one in his hands, and there's that moment when he opens it and just he just reads like one or two sentences, and it just immediately pulls him in, and it's like to kind of show the power the books have just in that one moment. I thought worked really nicely, but then they tend to once again kind of really push forward the hey, it's like current times message with the whole Shannon talking about how we got to this point, basically because of outrage culture, I guess. Because we had the people who tried to change Huckleberry Finn for the obvious reasons, and then there was like, white people would get angry, feminists got angry, and yeah, it's basically that's how we got to this point. And it's and if you want to get really heavy-handed, there's the point in time when a person has books strapped to them like a terrorist would a bomb. It's very it can get very, very heavy-handed. There is one addition that I do remember them, or I guess omission that they did, which is have completely removed the character of Montag's wife. Which I don't think is... I mean, maybe... omitting an entire character, I can maybe see, depending on what direction they want to take. But the thing is his wife, if I remember correctly, is, like really crucial to Montag's change throughout the story, usually. And it really kind of puts in this interesting conflict, because they're on such opposite sides of this whole battle. But the problem with that is that you kind of immediately, when you see that they've cast Sofia Boutella as the girl, you think, you kind of start to wonder, oh god, please tell me that's not why they omitted the wife. Please don't go in the place I think you're going to take this. Because I do think, because they also made her older in the Truffaut movie, I think this character probably does work a lot better as young as she. I think wasn't she like a teenager in the source material, to where there's like no question in regards to this being like a platonic thing. But they've got this whole like her being a criminal that they're kind of somewhat after thing. And there's the time when they're like starting to, he's really starting to kind of see that change as he starts reading, but there's that. They get too close for comfort, and that's just not what this story needs. Even though they don't really go in that direction, they get close enough that it bothers me. Maybe that's my problem, but I don't know. I don't really care for that. And then his relationship with her here, the problem is that it feels really like rushed. And because that feels rushed, another thing that feels rushed is how he turns on Shannon. But the thing is they're built up here. I can't remember how close they were in the source material or the other movie, but here they're like Montag and the captain are like almost best friends. Like even though he's his superior and he basically like trained him all the way up to this point, there's still definitely an almost family-like quality to them here. And there's like hardly any build-up whatsoever for him to just turn on Shannon like that. And it just feels really off and completely and totally unearned. And which pretty much, is part of the reason that the last third or so of the movie just doesn't work. Because we just don't feel that rift between them at all. It's just forced in there by the screenplay, and that's really unfortunate. Once again, I don't know if it's a TV thing or not, but another thing here is that it's not really effective, like, aesthetically. Not through lack of trying. They do try to do, certain things here and there. They do the thing. This is like, they start off with this, and that's when I got really worried right at the start because of this. This movie incorporates the vague, blurry flashback stuff that a lot of movies do when they're trying to put a little hint of mystery here that will slowly unravel that you just never give a fuck about from the beginning. But they really try to interest you by making it really vague and all that, and they keep cutting back to it just at seemingly random times. I think we're supposed to think it's triggered by what's happening to him in the current story, but no, it just feels really shoehorned in, and it just comes off as like this poor attempt to be like flashy direction, and it doesn't work. That's if there's one thing in media that needs to be banned, it's the vague, blurry flashback. That's what people should be breaking into houses and burning. They also kind of disappointed me with their little cast list here at the start because Keira DeLay is in this. Remember Dave from 2001: A Space Odyssey? And when I saw that, it was like, there are a couple of guys he could be in this movie, which would be really interesting. But like he could be the dude that like he goes to. That this is where my memory gets kind of vague, but I remember there was a guy that he was associated with in the source material. Or there's the dude that was like the head of the book people or whatever. Nope. Keira DeLay is a dude that's got like 30 seconds towards the beginning, and he's just one of the dudes they take away. It's like, wow, if you wasted that opportunity, can't wait to see what other opportunities you wasted. And sure enough, yeah. But yeah, its main problem really is just how kind of laughably heavy-handed it is, and how like so blatantly obvious the symbolism is. And these little points in the story to where they already had something. Like, you just look at the source material, you've already got it. But it's like, every time you see where they misstep in this one, you could trace it back to, well, if they just stuck to the... Because normally it's like, okay, if you want to have your freedom and tell your own story and you just have a vague outline with source material, fine, as long as it's great. But it's like, all the missteps here, you could just look at the source material and say, that's how you could have fixed it. It's just to not have fucked with it. But, that's, and I guess none of these movies are going to have the Hound in them. I guess we're just never going to see that thing in a movie. Because I don't remember that in the Truffaut movie. I don't know that they would have had Truffaut would have had the resources in the 60s at the time either, but, yeah, so this really, really could have been something. I'm really not quite sure how it turned into this, but, that's unfortunate because that had a lot of promise, so, yeah. Oh, God. our next one's going to be Terminal, a movie with, we're going into that kind of, you know, noir thing, where it's like trying to be really super cool with, it's got like the neon lights, and it's got people like smoking in diners, and it's got like pretty much everybody's a seedy character at one place or another. They jump around in time a little bit with really, really obnoxious editing. And we've got like Margot Robbie wearing Louise Brooks wigs. To the younger people, that would be like a Mia Wallace wig. And really the only thing that this movie's missing is a really annoying constant soundtrack, which I'm guessing was probably not in the budget looking at this thing, so there's that. So it's basically, I'm getting the tired vibes of Atomic Blonde and whatever the fuck Atomic Blonde was doing. Only this time our cast list is like Margot Robbie, Simon Pegg, Dexter Fletcher, Max Irons, Mike Myers. A really good, I mean, you know, Max Irons is somebody that I like go crazy for or anything, but I mean, given the, you know, the blood that's in him, it's like, surely he'll have a decent performance in him at some point, but everybody else, it was like really exciting to see, and it was like, this could have been really something interesting and really something legitimately cool, not just trying so horribly desperately to be cool. But unfortunately, we don't really get that. So what we have here is this really cheap-looking animated city that I think is supposed to have like this whole almost like a comic book feel. Maybe it's like it looks really flashy with lights, but at the same time it looks, you know, super run down and dirty and all that. Like a bunch of corrupt shit happens here, a bunch of violent shit happens here, I guess. But every time we get those exterior shots to go from one place to the other, it just looks really weird and really cheap. Certainly not the desired effect, which sucks because this would be a pretty good setting if it had infinitely better production values, which it does not. And because a lot of the time, like, everything looks really dark, and not like in the, you know, gritty way. I mean, just literally looks dark. One of those things where it's like one of the only lights in a scene is that, you know, fan that production designers love to just put in walls and have light come through. And the thing is when there are lights in the movie, there's just this constant annoying thing where they're like reflecting off the lens in a really bad way that I think is supposed to give it some certain, you know, neon look or whatever. It looks like shit. It really does. And as you can probably guess, with a movie that thinks it's this cool, there's going to be a lot of attempts at witty dialogue that pretty much almost always fall flat. Because I can hardly say anything about the performances either. Because, you know, I mean, Margot Robbie, I guess, is working with what she has, but her character's kind of the whole main problem, not just with the aesthetic, but this whole, you can tell how hard the movie's trying to be cool. And in most of these diner scenes, Simon Pegg, it's like, I can actually imagine these, like, you can almost see it, like, when you watch him. It's like, you can imagine this stupid piece of dialogue, or this bland-ass cliche piece of dialogue on the paper, and the way he says it, it's like you can actually actively see him trying to bring life into it, and it's not working. And I think he knows, honestly. So, he's so used to like these Edgar Wright scripts, you can tell he knows when he knows when he's working with shit. And this is definitely that. And there's a back and forth here with Dexter Fletcher and Max Irons, which I think you need a stronger, more appealing actor than Max Irons for this to work, because Dexter Fletcher's like the high point of this movie. He's really great here, and there's like one of the only memorable scenes in the movie is a funny moment that's like 10 seconds long of how he deals with board games. And it's like, it doesn't have anything to do with anything, it's just a funny little insert that's in there that works because of him. But apart from that, everything is just falling left and right, to the point that I don't want to seem nitpicky, but I probably will, because there's one particular line that just got to me in a way that it just really felt like the writing knew exactly what it wanted to be, but just had no idea how to get there and make it work. case in point, there's a point in time where Max Irons has a gun pointed at Mike Myers, and Margot Robbie's trying to calm him down and say, don't shoot him, he's just the messenger. And he's like, well, he's about to be a very dead messenger. And it's like, I think that line was supposed to follow her saying, he's very something. Because you don't just say, well, he's about to be a very dead messenger. It's like, where does that line come from he's about to be very dead. He doesn't say messenger. He says he's about to be very dead, or very shot, or something. And she said he's just the messenger. These lines do not follow each other. Something, I don't know if something was cut out, or a line was changed at the last minute, or somebody accidentally said the wrong line, or what it was, but once again, it sounded like absolute ass. So, another thing that just really doesn't work here is, and this might not matter in another movie, but here it kind of does, and that is the fact that there is an extreme lack of premise for most of the movie. This is honestly a lot. Started reminding me a lot of a movie I talked about last week, Josie. It's pretty much the same thing. It feels like there's absolutely no setup to this. Everything is happening for no reason, only because we're building to something that's going to pay off in the last 10 or 15 minutes. But until we get to that point, the movie just has nothing to do. It just needs to buy its time until it can say, oh, look how we fooled you, or look what we were hiding from you this whole time. Surprise. But it's like, you kind of gotta make the rest of the movie add up to that before you get there. Because there's, like, it's too in love with its own elements. Like, it loves its shitty neon production design. It loves the stupid dialogue between its characters. It loves how smooth it thinks everybody is and all of its little tricks or whatever. Only problem is that none of these have a product. They just kind of... they don't have a sum. They just add, and then that's what they get so swept up in that, it's like... oh, by the way, this doesn't really connect to this. This very, very vague... The whole Simon Pegg thing barely connects to any of this. And they spend so much time building it up, and there is, like, a payoff to it, but in the long run, it's like this small in regards to how it even fits into all this. It really doesn't matter. And obviously, there's one particular, this is one of those movies that just really, like, in the last 10 or 15 minutes, bombards you with twists. And it's like, it's one thing to say, like, oh, there's a twist, but then there's a twist on top of a twist and so on. This is spoof levels. This is spoof levels of twist after twist after twist after twist after twist. There's, like, fucking 10 of them revealed in, like, 2 minutes. And it gets dumber and dumber and dumber, as you can probably guess. Which sucks, because I can see it, because there's one of these, the one you're kind of waiting on. There's one particular hidden element that we know of throughout this. The rest just kind of, the writer just pulls out of his ass, with hardly any setup. But there's one in particular, there's one hidden element throughout the entire movie, where it's like you're trying to figure out a certain thing, but it's like, wait, if you have any brain whatsoever, you figured this out way early, and you're basically just waiting for the movie to reveal it. And it's like, it was so blatantly obvious. I was just, like, every new scene, I was waiting for just that to go ahead and be revealed. But nope, they saved it for the end, because it was so smart, I guess. I don't know. So, yeah, that's what this was. It's weird to me that they got this cast. If I had to guess, obviously Margot Robbie produced it, and she's getting, like, she got this whole big, love fest for producing I, Tonya. So it was like, okay, so she could have done anything, and somehow she ended up with this straight-to-video shit. And it's like, Simon Pegg, Dexter Fletcher, Mike Myers, and it's like, you look at it and you're like, oh, probably because Margot Robbie was signed up. So I would think this all comes back to her. So it's like, okay, I don't know. So that's, yeah, just total all-around idiocy disguised as something real cool and real clever, which is a kiss of death when you can do neither. Yet you seem to have such a confidence about it, so I don't know. That's shit. But our last movie is going to be Thoroughbreds. I'm really late to the party on this one. This is the one that I saw a few posters for that was built up as... I think this is officially Anton Yelchin's last movie. I think. And the main stars of it, though, are Anya Taylor-Joy and Olivia Cooke. And we're basically building up for one of those young people living a rich life of paradise are actually evil and twisted movies. That might sound specific, but not really. If you just look in, like, you know, a list of dark comedies, you'll find about 50 of these, probably. And we'll talk about some of those. So, we have two girls that used to be best friends that seem to be on totally opposite sides of things now. Anya Taylor-Joy is, number one, I'm pretty sure she's well into her 20s, and surprisingly, she's one of the few people that can actually play a teenager pretty well. And Olivia Cooke for the most part, but the thing here is that Anya Taylor-Joy is like just the normal, seemingly, you know, rich girl. She's tutoring her, so she's obviously, you know, big in the academic department or whatever. So there's such an innocence to her. Anytime somebody goes to either shake her hand or hug her, she flinches. And then we have Olivia Cooke, who is this... I'm guessing undiagnosed problem that she has, where she is just literally emotionless, but it could be from emotional trauma or whatever, but she just cannot feel anything. She says basically the most she can feel is hungry. But emotion-wise, there's just nothing. Just no guilt, no empathy, no feelings of any sort. And for some reason, she's like really inspired by Steve Jobs. So there's that, which doesn't really amount to anything. I think it's just a humorous thing to throw in there a few times, which is fine. And with this setup, I stress the word setup, what I found really interesting here was that obviously with this condition that Olivia Cooke has, she's going to be... she's definitely going to be the darker character of the two. Her mind's going to be in the darker places. We know this from the opening scene, but it's further displayed. And I found it kind of interesting that they didn't give Anya Taylor-Joy the darker part, because with the whole, like, she's coming off like The Witch and Split and Morgan, where she either played really dark characters, really sinister characters, or was just in a really dark or sinister situation. So it seemed interesting to me and kind of threw me off a little bit, but that she's the one that seems to be the more innocent of the two of them, the more, like, guarded. But then of course, her depiction becomes a bit more complicated, we'll say. But, yeah, and there is something definitely darkly funny here. And it does feel like... I guess aesthetically it does, you know... kind of give itself a bit of a different feel in regards to those other movies. You can still see other movies like Heathers and Heavenly Creatures and even maybe like a little American Beauty, honestly, in regards to the seemingly perfect, you know, suburban lifestyle or whatever, having that dark side. Blue Velvet, I guess. Blue Velvet's a pretty big reach in regards to this movie, but the type of movie you get. And, yeah, they just have especially with Olivia Cooke's character's condition, there's going to be a lot of, like, deadpan delivery, which is where kind of a lot of the humor lies for a while before it kind of goes into its more darker places. But even then, it does still feel like there's this kind of undertone of it gets to the dark comedy before, you know, dark actions come into play, for lack of a better way to put that. Like, the moment when there's, like, this... She goes to the door to see Olivia Cooke, and her mom just has this really, you know, sunny disposition, and she's like, is she here? It's like, oh, yeah, she's out back. And it's like you expect to see her, like, maybe, you know, lounging in a lawn chair, or go back to Heather's playing fucking croquet or something. But she's just standing in the middle of the yard, just staring into the trees. and her mom is still sunny, like this is a normal thing. That's pretty funny and very dark. And that's where a lot of the movie's kind of humor is, to give you an idea about that. And then we do fit Anton Yelchin's character into this. It's a little weird because you kind of think he's going to be more important than he than he really is. But the thing here is this is one of those kind of areas where it's kind of like people. I hate to say this, but it's like after somebody is gone, people tend to like maybe possibly build them up a little bit, maybe more than they actually have, but there's just kind of that kind of post-death praise where you like really put them on a pedestal. Anton Yelchin doesn't have to worry about that because he was able to leave enough behind to back that up, because anything that he does here, there's something, like I said, it seems almost like in the long run he's a throwaway character, but there's still something here that he absolutely can bring, especially in this first scene when we're not quite sure. There's something a little bit threatening about him, but for the most part you can tell he's the kind of guy to where, like, he really builds himself up. The more he builds himself up, you can tell the more stupidity he's trying to hide. So it's like, this is the kind of guy to where he's being accused at this party of statutory rape, and one of the teenagers is like, he, fucked a girl our age when he was 25, and he defends himself by saying, I was 23. And he just really brought something nice to this. And any time he was on screen, he was one of those characters where, even though the type of character that he is, you still kind of anticipated him coming back, because of how much he was able to bring to this character. So that could have just kind of been nothing, but yeah, he really does make it work. So kind of, it feels a little similar to his character in Only Lovers Left Alive, and I mean that in a good way. So there's that. Another interesting thing that this movie does is that, especially if you look at the MPAA rating, and why they say it's rated R, because this kind of feels inaccurate. Because basically the violence in this movie is almost entirely implied, despite the fact that it seems to build itself up like it's going to be like really violent. Because there's the opening scene with the horse, that we know something horrible and graphic happened, but we never actually see that happen. And it actually is almost, I guess it's one of those cases where it's unsettling to the point that just the way the story's told and the way they build up to it but dance around it almost makes you think you've seen it when you look back on it, when you actually haven't. There's also the thing when Anya Taylor-Joy messes with her stepdad's bike, and we don't see this happen. There's just a cut, and then he's just walking around the house with a couple of bandages on his face. And it's like, and there's a couple of other times where this also comes into play, and it's like, I found that really interesting that they just completely and totally brush past anything violent that happens in this, despite how key the violence is to the story, which is really interesting. So, the score also plays an interesting part in this, to where it's like, it basically sounds like half the time like bizarre sound effects. It reminded me, not in like sound, but just in however it was put together, reminded me a lot of the score from Punch Drunk Love, to where like half the time it just seems like weird sound effects, but it works not near as well as something like Punch Drunk Love's score, but for the most part it does its job, but there are times where it feels a bit like overkill and a little too weird. Another commendable thing, of course, is the fact that this was obviously really low budget, because it's like, what kind of budget would you need for something like this? But the thing is that it doesn't look low budget at all. It looks very polished and very well put together, and very confidently made. But at the same time, it does kind of have that thing where you just can't help but fall back and feel like it really feels like other movies. There's a lot of Heathers in it. There's certainly a lot of heavenly creatures in it. Like, one of the first, like, way back, the first time I read the plot synopsis, like, months ago, it was like, that sounds like heavenly creatures a lot. But, the thing here, though, is that it's also trying to do, like, going back to the Heathers thing, not just, the whole, it's one thing on the surface and then another, but also, the way it's basically trying to be a satire on that kind of upper class lifestyle or whatever. Only problem is that the movie itself is a little... There's nothing particularly complex about the movie at all, which makes this satire feel almost like, after a while, like, so what? Like, it doesn't really add anything. There's not enough to the movie for it to have any particular impact or to be really saying anything about that. It's just kind of in there and sort of somewhat poking fun at it, but it just kind of feels like that just kind of goes away, or it just doesn't really matter at all. Um, and it's, I mean, you can tell also that it is clever and it's really well shot and all that, but it does overall, well, I said the appearance kind of makes it stand out a little bit. It still kind of feels like it lacks its own identity, and it really feels like it might be something really bizarre. It was certainly built up that way. Everybody's talking about how, like, it's this, I hate to use other people's, opinions to influence my own, but there was a lot surrounding this in regards to, like, it was unpredictable, and it's, like, totally insane, and it's, like, off the wall crazy. But it really is kind of none of those things, at least to that extreme. It's just, I felt like very early on, you could pretty much tell where most of this was going. There might be a turn here and there, but for the most part, it did seem to find a line pretty early that it just kind of went down, and there's really just nothing else it does to build itself up except kind of the way it shows itself. And like I said, if they're trying to do something with the satire thing, it's there a little bit, but it's basically like an afterthought when all is said and done, and then after a while it just feels like, kind of, what's the point? But still, there are definitely a lot of movies like this that cannot pull it off as well as this does. So there's that. Like I said, all those other movies, like, there's just countless bad imitations of movies like, Heathers or whatever. But, yeah, so that's basically how I feel about that. So, I think that's going to be all. I think next week is... I have no idea if Upgrade is coming here or not. That's a very small theater count. I might see Action Point out of curiosity. I don't know, but yeah, I'm kind of vague on what else is coming. So, well, that's what we have for a while, and then there's another Versus coming, all that other stuff. So yeah, until all that stuff, that's it.